Today we're going to talk about architecting automated solutions for real-world flow anti-patterns. My name is Engin Utkan. Welcome to my session. We have a little bit of a flickering issue, like on the slide, so you're going to try and pretend that's kind of cool and retro, right? So I think the recording is going to pick that up as well. So let me introduce myself. I'm a Salesforce MVP with 22 certifications. I work as a consultant, trainer, content creator. I'm the founder of BRD Pro Consulting, a blog and content platform called Salesforce Break, both on a website and also YouTube. And I also lead Flow Canvas Academy, and I provide recorded and live content for flow education. Now, what I've been observing is that we have obviously many more people creating flows like in the recent years, and that's actually the objective, right? You know, Salesforce is pushing the flow solution, and when they talk about the persona who is using flows, they sometimes say low-code developer, they sometimes say citizen developer, sometimes they say admins, sometimes super user. So that seems to be evolving and changing as well. And now we have also AI creating flows. So we've started getting a lot of spaghetti low-code, right? We've had spaghetti code, now we have also spaghetti low-code. Maybe we have spaghetti soup altogether, right? So that's kind of the inspiration for my presentations today. So the way we're going to try and do this, I'm going to try and do this interactively. The timing is going to be a challenge. So whenever I have a point up here, I'm going to ask for your opinion on how to do this better. Please talk loudly. We don't really have time to pass around the mic. I'll repeat your answers here so that the recording will pick it up. Let's do this interactive together. Let's start with the easy items, right? So we all know, probably we all know in this room that we should use before save flows, right? They are fast and efficient. Now, before I get into this, I actually generated a poll for the session, and I said, what makes you cringe? What makes your skin crawl when you open the flow canvas and look at another flow? Like maybe it's your flow from a few years back, or maybe it's somebody else's flow. Who responded to everything? There were a couple of people. Okay, well, that's interesting. There were obviously many answers there, but we all see some things when we open, whether it's low code or code, it doesn't matter whether we open somebody else's or our own from another life, and then we review it. We all see things that can be improved. Now, this is a very, very simple thing that can be spotted immediately. What I aim to do here is you open the flow canvas, you look at a flow, and then you should be able to see some signs that the flow was not built right? Or there are opportunities. There are some situations where there is like this questionable design, but if you look into the detail of this, sometimes you see that that's actually an appropriate solution for that particular problem. In this case, though, if you look at the details here, you see that the flow triggers on an opportunity, and it's actions and related records, which means after save, and that is updating the opportunity itself. So it's obvious that this flow should be what? Before save flow, right? And the reason for that is simple, and in Melissa's session, she actually showed the same graphic over here, which is from the Architect website, Salesforce Architect website of record triggered automation. If you look at the performance benchmarks, before save flow is almost as fast as before save apex. Now, one could say, well, there's almost 6 times difference, but that's 1 millisecond we're talking about. So for most people, that is not going to be a noticeable difference. And you know, before save flow, interestingly, actually triggers even before save apex. That's also an interesting fact about those. So whenever we are doing updates, and Salesforce named this one quite appropriately, fast field updates, the before save, we need to be in before save. Now, would it break if we were in after save? If we had updates in after save, a lot of updates, and then we just, put our fast field update in there. We didn't want 2 flows. That's totally fine, if you ask me. So, when you express your opinion, don't worry about, saying the wrong things. Just experiment. I've just been informed there are about 1 million viewers. It will be on recording. You'll be responsible. People will remember you, right? No pressure. Okay, so second obvious, right? No DMLs, SQLs inside the loop. What's DML? Database manipulation language, right? So your create, update, delete. What's SQL? Your Salesforce object query language. Those are your gets. So how many do we get in one transaction? How many DMLs do we get? Do we remember? What's 150. How many SQLs do we get in one transaction? 100. We get 100. So sometimes we just want to create a solution on the go, and then we say like, I'm actually updating the opportunity line items, the opportunity products, and I know I don't have more than 5 in my org, right? Well, we are all going to change responsibilities, change orgs, and we don't know how many opportunity line items that organization is going to have in the future, right? So that's the problem with looping and doing these things inside loop. We don't really know how many iterations they are going to get in the future at some point. So that's why we don't do this. So what's the alternative? How do we deal with that? Collections? Yeah, we build collections, right? We put, if it's an update, we actually put all of our updates into one single collection, and then we do our update outside the loop in one shot. Then it counts as one DML or one SQL, depending. It doesn't matter how many you have in that collection. Yeah, come on in here. All right, so the next one. How many people built a flow that actually kind of resembles this, looks like this? Do we have any hands? You have? That's why you cringe at everything, right? When you open, because that's what you open. So, I never actually built anything that's this big. And sometimes when people start asking questions about, like, we used to have the iteration limits, right? 2,000 elements executed. We don't really have that anymore. I used to get so many questions about that. I'm like, well, how do you hit that? That should be quite rare. They are like constantly, I built a flow and I keep hitting that. You probably built it wrong if you're hitting that, right? So you shouldn't be hitting that. It shouldn't be that easy. We don't really have that anymore. So the third sin of flow canvas, right, is don't make it too big. Well, first of all, when you make it too big, it's really hard to read it, either for you or for anybody else who's going to open that, right? You could be working in teams, you could change responsibilities, the next person is going to open this up and they are going to be cursing you, I promise. So don't do that. So now, what ends up happening quite often is like people build, for example, record-triggered automation, and then in record-triggered automation, there's a bunch of decisions. It's like, well, I need to send out email alerts. Okay, good. But I have like 30, 40, 50 scenarios. Look, if the email contains this, the email topic is about that one, then it needs to go to Mike. If the email topic is this, it needs to go to Susan. If it has another word, then it needs to go to Mike and Susan, right? So you have all these decisions. The thing becomes humongous. So when you have these things, first look into decisions. Can this be split, right? If we're talking about record-triggered flow, you can split them. I'm in the camp of split them, not, make one big flow. Obviously, the other obvious solution to this is, so that it can be easily digestible, is, build subflows where you have those decisions, kind of group them logically together, and then, deal with those that way. Any other suggestions here? How do you deal with that?
It's not a question, just a comment. The problem is Salesforce used to recognize
That's right.
6 years ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, I teach this, and then I actually say I don't recommend that at all. And I've been saying that pretty much for the last 3, 4, 5 years. I can't even remember. But there have been many variations. Like, first of all, here is the thing. Let's put this. Let's put this out there and talk about it. Now, the human mind loves very clear recommendations, right? You know, we are very hungry for best practices. So sometimes somebody asks me a question and I give them an answer like the cool architect answer of it depends or something. They are like, no, tell me. Is it black or is it white, right? So they like it, they are hungry for it. So what ended up happening is first there was one flow per object, then it was, well, you know what, one before save, one after save. Then somebody said, well, now we have before these, so now one before save, one after save, one before the, come on, man. So obviously there is not one answer for each use case or user story out there, but you know, I think wherever it makes sense, just split. By the way, for the participants with your answers, I have t-shirts and swag out here, so I'll give those out at the end. 2 t-shirts, 1 hat. Flownatic.
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
With country name stabilization coming in, we've got third-party systems that are accessing them backwards and forwards. They're not compliant, so therefore the client may turn around and say, I only want one flow. I don't want 26 flows for, say, the country names alphabetically or the country codes alphabetically. So they're going to have something that looks like that.
Well, I mean, obviously, when you're a consultant working for a client and the client is insisting on one solution, there are always trade-offs to be made, right? You know, you try and convince them what the better solution is, and if you're not able to do it, then you're going to agree maybe on 80%. You know, if you don't like it big, but you still have to do it big for them, don't make it this big, right? This is an eye test. By the way, this is from, I think, Adam White's blog post. It's from Salesforce on blog. So number 4, starting with a loop in schedule triggered flows. Now, when you build a schedule triggered flow, you know your schedule triggered flow actually runs on all the records that actually are in the conditions, right? You know, if the conditions evaluate to true, then that logic is going to run on each and every record in your org. So you shouldn't really need a loop, right, going into your schedule triggered flow. Now, there are situations where you could need that. Many people don't realize your schedule triggered flow does not have to run on an object. Your schedule triggered flow can be scheduled and then look into your org, get records, loop through records, do some updates, as long as you don't run into Apex CPU errors, because that's the more popular one now. We don't have to go by the maximum 2,000 elements executed one. But usually people who don't understand the whole logic about schedule triggered flows, they think they need to go run an automated action in there or schedule it for the night and then go get all the opportunities and then run a loop on those opportunities. That's not how that works. If you have 100 opportunities in your org and you do this, then you're running 100 times 100 actions. So that's not going to end well, right? Number 5, loops inside loops. Again, Melissa talked about this, said it's not great neither in low code or code. It doesn't matter, pro code. I mean, there are situations where you may have to do this, but whenever you see this, it's a potential problem. Again, many flow builders who don't have advanced knowledge, they don't really use collection filters very well. Now, there are a lot of situations where I end up doing this because I use the collection filter and I have only one record in my collection, but I still have to loop to get it. That's, you know, one iteration that doesn't even count as loop. But it looks like loop inside loop, right? Definitely look for collection filter to do that. You can use now transform element to massage some of the data inside the collection. But what is what is the recommendation here? If it looks like you have to loop within loop, what would be your recommendation? What should be tried?
Use a map in Apex instead?
Yes. Most probably, you're better off in Apex. Not because loop inside loop is a great idea in Apex, but your SQL is much more powerful. Your list management is much more powerful. You can actually point to individual records inside your maps and that kind of stuff. There are so many things that you can do in Apex that you cannot do in Flow when it comes to collections. So 6, record-triggered flow that starts with a decision. So when you look at this, that's also kind of related to trying to build only one single record-triggered flow for the object. When you try and do that, what ends up happening is you just walk into a decision. You don't have any criteria in your start element. You say, okay, if it's white, do this. If it's red, do this. If it's black, do that, right? So sometimes we just want to check one thing and then disqualify the action. There is something that we cannot check in the start element, and we want to go into a decision. Check, for example, if something is null or whatever, and then, there is not really a path on the other hand, but, you continue doing your actions on the back of it, that may be fine. But if you have multiple paths kind of built out, running down, then why are they not separate record-triggered flows, right? So, you may want to question that because that's much more efficient. So when you have that in your start element, I always use the analogy when I teach this, like sometimes you think you don't have milk, you jump into your car and then you run your car, and then, I'm getting old, I'm guilty of doing that sometimes. And then you say like, wait a minute, maybe I have milk in the fridge inside the garage. You actually turn off your car, go inside, and then find the milk, right? You already ran gas. You already ran your car, consumed gas. That's what happens when you actually start your flow. So you don't really want to start your flow. You want to check your fridge in the garage right in the start element, right? So don't walk into a decision there. Number 7, formula resources and criteria. Do you need all the formula resources? Now, this is the current situation. Hopefully in the future it is going to get better, but the formula resources inside Flow are not very performant. So they are evaluated multiple times throughout the logic. And when you don't need one, don't use one. It's not going to break your flow, but it's going to make it significantly slower if you accumulate all those things. And it does happen quite a bit where people actually build logic into, like complicated logic into a formula, and then they create something like, is it time to execute formula? If that's true, then go down this path in the decision. Well, if you can build that inside the decision with the line editor, I call that the line editor. We don't really get a formula editor there, so if we have to go, this evaluates a true and or whatever, so do it right there. So 8, do the DMLs have criteria other than ID? Now, many people don't realize when you say, okay, well, I want to do this update when this variable is null, or when this field value is null. If you have any kind of condition in your update other than checking for ID, you can point to an ID. Do you know what you consume in terms of SQL and DML against your governor limits? It's actually one SQL, one DML. Many people don't realize that. They actually walk into complicated flows. They tell me, okay, well, I see the dreaded 101 SQL, right, error. And I look through, it's kind of, it happens quite a bit when you migrate process builders into Flow. There is a bunch of conditions inside your update that, is carried over. That consumes unnecessary SQLs. Are they really necessary? Go in there, check. Probably not necessary. And if you really need to do this, you can actually do it in most cases via decision right before. My updates almost never has any criteria in it, almost never. I check it with a decision before. Unused excessive input and output variables. Like when people get started on Flow, they are like, well, this variable has checkboxes right below. Should it be available for input, output? Why not? Input, output. And then you run the auto launch flow, it's asking like 20 million input variables. I'm like, what is this? You know, like, and the outputs are, they are all coming out as output as well. And they don't really understand the concept. Like, this is by design, variable values are reserved for the environment they are in. So you created an environment, this is your flow, you're running your logic, your variables are going to live and die in your environment, right? So that's by design. And if you need to make that available, input, output, outside your flow, you need to know the implications. There are security implications. And unnecessary use of system context, that these go hand in hand. You know, Matt talks quite a bit about this, you know, especially for the guest user on the community digital experience sites. When you expose these flows, run them at system context, they can be exploited. So system context is kind of God level access. It can perform anything an admin can. Ignores the profiles, it ignores the sharing settings. This is especially dangerous, like for the guest user on digital experience site. Is it necessary? And sometimes in practical applications, we see people are hiding buttons, kind of, you know, like actions to avoid some profiles from using some flows that run in system context. That's not security, that's focus, right? So if you want real security, you need to do that at the profile level. Now we can actually decide when the profile runs the flow. Absence of fault paths. Do you know the difference between handled and unhandled faults and the behavior, right? Fault paths, use the fault paths as much as possible. Now, if you see that your flow is going down fault paths all the time, I always say, like, you know, try and avoid the fault paths with your logic. Build your logic, build logic inside your flow that can handle that case rather than constantly going down the fault path. But still, they're important. They help you deal with that situation. Sometimes in screen flows, it helps us to offer choices to the user to remedy the problem. And be aware of partial commit. If you use a fault path, if you're trying to do a DML using a collection, it actually commits all the individual records that don't throw a fault. It'll only not commit those that have a problem. So that could be a problem for you, right? There are situations where you may not want to include the fault path because you want the whole thing to fail. So rollback records. Rollback records we have only inside screen flows. Now in screen flows, the transaction logic is quite interesting. Everything between two screens is one single transaction. The transaction kind of automatically splits when you go to that next. So start to first screen is one transaction, first screen to second screen. And there are also some local actions that break the transaction as well. There are situations where you create kind of a record because you need the record ID, and then you want user to provide input for you to update that record, and then your flow fails halfway through, then you left in your org a record halfway, uncooked record, let's say. And you don't want to do that. Use your rollback records element to roll back that DML. And then give your user the message saying, nothing has been committed. You know, you may want to try this again or inform your admin. Hard-coded IDs, this is another obvious one. Avoid this point of failure and simplify deployments. When you use a hard-coded record ID, your deployment between unrelated environments will fail. For deployments in sandbox, your reference could work if the record has been included in your partial full refresh. However, you don't want this. You don't want to leave this to chance, right? You know, once you use these hard-coded IDs, usually your post-deployment tasks are pretty long. You know, like it's kind of like crochet. You know, you deploy and then you're like, okay, I need to update this record ID, that record ID. Record type check. In record-triggered flows, record type can and should be checked in the start element criteria. We can't do that now, like in the formula builder. We can check either for record type developer name, record type name, and the preferred method is record type developer name. So that helps us to narrow things down and make things efficient. Now, this is an important one. Let's have a discussion on this one. Now, sometimes you have logic that looks like that can and will be updated quite frequently by some profiles in the org, right? So how many people received use cases, user stories before that says like, okay, well, all opportunities with a certain zip code should be owned by Andy, all other opportunities with this other zip code should be owned by Harvey, and all opportunities in Florida, if not in this zip list, then they should be owned by Susan, who's the manager, and so on. So you know this is going to change, right? If you build this inside your flow, you better expect the next phone call, like in a month, to update this. Or you're not going to be able to turn this over. So what's a better way of dealing with this? Custom metadata is one answer. Custom object is another answer. So what I usually do in these scenarios is I will ask who will update the logic? Who is responsible? What profile are they? Do they have access to setup? What access do they have, and how frequently will it change, right? Is that going to be quite frequent? Now, custom metadata is great, is usually recommended in the community, but it's in setup. And in 9 out of 10, use cases that I built it in custom object, because if I build it in custom object, I can give view access to the whole organization if they need to see this. Sometimes there are questions, why does Andy own this, right? Does the automation work well? You can just go look, right? It's viewable. And only one person can edit it, and that person doesn't need to be the admin. Obviously, there are several solutions for the same need there, use case. 16, HTTP callout outbound message not on async path, right? Outbound messages and HTTP callouts are good integration tools that we can use now. HTTP callout is rather new, and Salesforce requires for those to be on an async path. These can take longer than other transactions to complete, and async path will retry the message. And Salesforce will also throw an error if there is a DML before the callout in the flow as well. There is also a peculiar error message for that because there is an outstanding DML before the HTTP callout. So we need to be careful about. Number 17 is the flow comparing collections. So there are situations sometimes, people will come at me with a use case, user story. They'll say, okay, well, I'm just going to give you an example, but it's always related to the junction objects, right? There's a reference opportunity with multiple opportunity contact role records. That's the oldest one, let's say, right? And when the user creates or updates an opportunity record, the new opportunity record will inherit the same OCR records, compare two collections, and make the necessary changes to update the new opportunity records with the reference OCR collection, and keep it in sync maybe, right? So you're constantly comparing, and you need to go down 2 levels, compare collections to each other, and then if they match, you're okay. If they don't match, you need to create like records to match these. How can you achieve that? What's the recommended solution here? Compare the collections inside the flow?
Yes.
Okay, so this one actually you can handle very efficiently using some of the actions that we have on artificial SF. We have collection operators there that actually extend what you can do in flow. So you will build the thing in flow, but then if you call that action inside your artificial SF package, that gives you like superpowers to compare collections and then, to take differential. You don't really have to loop to do that, right? So it's best to defer this to code, but when you're deferring this to code, you can just use invocable actions. So the message here is use invocable actions. In my interactions with developers, I see many developers are quite let's say, hesitant to use invocable actions, but it's a super powerful tool for deployments for consultants as well, because it allows you to create efficient, powerful logic that you can turn over to the clients, and then the clients can actually change the logic that leads up to that action, right? Salesforce does it the same way. You implement Salesforce Scheduler, it comes with a bunch of Apex actions that you can call from flow. So, 18 email action not on async path. Now, emails unfortunately fail very easily for a multitude of reasons. Like, email format is not the correct one. The email bounced before is on that contact. You could hit limits. The clients out there are using email the way like a marketing email solution should be used, and they are hitting limits. So when this happens, you either handle it with a fault, or in some ways, it's actually better to kind of put these on an async path so that when the email fails, it doesn't really fail the whole transaction. That happens quite a bit, and it's quite problematic. I do this especially when I'm dealing with an object that receives new records via an integration. So you're buying leads at night. Another system is dropping leads into your Salesforce org, and then you have a bunch of emails triggering on the back of it. Your email fails, the lead is not there. The transaction fails, but you want that lead in your org. If your email fails, then you should handle that. You could handle that separately. So other miscellaneous items, add comments and descriptions, obviously, right? This is also another important one. Flow naming conventions. Especially when you're working in a team, you want to come up with a naming convention that works best for you, right? I was just in a presentation in Southeast Streaming, and a gentleman was presenting who leads a development team for government solutions, like very complex solutions, and he said he enforces a very strict naming convention all across flow and code, so that when they do their CI/CD and they'll look at problems, whatever, they can actually easily locate all the resources. It's very important. Use Apex invocable actions. Apex invocable actions will give your organizations and your clients power, right? So if you build everything in Apex, the logic usually that leads up to that action is going to change. And if that organization doesn't have access to developer resources, they are not going to be able to update that. So leave the trivial logic to flow, and then build the powerful stuff on the back of it as an invocable so that they can use and reuse that. And use decisions before delete element to check if the record exists. Another small example, but like you go to delete, the record doesn't exist, it's going to fail, right? So you need to check. Many record triggered flows on the same object, but no trigger order is determined, specified. So just you may want to order those, like give it an intentional order to make sure that it runs the same way every time. And again, use update with conditions to update multiple records. That's also a simple thing. Pavel just mentioned that yesterday. I just entered it into the slide. He said he looked at a very complicated flow that goes through a collection, modifies some of the records, and then goes to an update, whatever. It just was super complicated, although it could have been dealt with like, one update on multiple records using the in, not in operators, whatever. So, you got to know and use the capabilities. It can be simplified. And my personal pet peeve, if you're still using freeform, please do not leave a bunch of elements disconnected on the side, because you just think those elements from 5 versions before you may need again, and you're hoarding elements. Don't do that. Delete. Okay, you know yourselves. You can easily build them again. You get all these like warning messages. You need a clean state of mind. You don't want those warning messages. Okay. All right. So what else should we be looking for? So I welcome your contributions. I built this content by looking at as many flows as possible. So first of all, let me just talk through the second and third bullet first. Like we have a Flownatic Slack workspace. If you can look it up, like on Google, just type in Flownatic Slack workspace. It's managed by the community for the community. I'm there, and then there are a bunch of more intelligent people there providing answers whenever you have a question. And we try to learn from each other, like from each other's use cases. So join that. You can write a blog post on this, either on your own blog or you can be a guest writer on Salesforce Break blog. Contact me. And now open discussion. Please contribute. Like, did I leave anything out? I try to remember everything, but you never know. There are just so many. Yeah.
FTP callouts. Quite often people don't assume they're going to get the 200 response rather than don't handle the error response when they get something not there that comes back from like either no response or
exactly. That's a very good point. Now, can you help us also? Well, actually, the question and comment here was when dealing with HTTP callouts, everybody plans on receiving a 200 successful message. But what happens when they receive a different message? You have to also build for that, test for that. Now, my question to you is going to be, what's the best way doing testing in HTTP callout integration scenarios? Like you use a Postman or something like that, to try and go through those scenarios?
I'm probably wrong person to ask on that, but because I don't tend to do it. But as long as they're covered, as long as you've got 300 and 400 covered maybe within the flow so that you then push out, if it's a screen, push out some way of handling email out, or if it's a screen flow, then you can push them to the user.
Yeah. So yeah, build for all kinds of different scenarios. Melissa, did you have any recommendations on to how to test maybe HTTP callout scenarios when you're building those with external systems? Use kind of Postman or something to...
Yeah, that's the first way. Use Postman.
That'll be it? Okay. Yes? Okay. You like the previous button to be removed, right? Well, actually, that used to be the default. Always remove the previous. Now, previous actually works. It actually gives you an option whether it should be refreshed and then that logic should be run again or something. I don't build that way, but I would at least say if you're going to leave previous in, you have to thoroughly test all the scenarios, right? Then the scenarios become so many. You would have to test, like, if you have 10 screens, you would have to test, like, whether they are going to be on the 7th screen, go back to 6 and the 7, 7, 6, 5, and then 6, whatever. So just take them out. That's what I would do, yeah. So the question and comment was, when you're building screen flows, remove the previous button. Any other?
Last one. No, question.
The time is up?
I've got one more.
Okay.
Bypassing flows, so having custom permission, so that and putting that in the entry criteria, so that you can have users, or you set yourself up to stop running these flows when you're doing a large data job, for example.
Just put your criteria in the entry criteria for what scenario you said?
Add a custom permission, say to call it bypass flows or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Then
Yeah.
that is the entry criteria that the user's not got that permission.
Yeah. Can you check for custom permission in the entry criteria?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's good. I have never done that. I learned something new. Thank you. I usually put my custom metadata switch in there, like on off, but I have not checked the custom permission one. That's a very good one. All right. So, right here. All right, here you go.
Thank you.
Here you go.
Thank you.
And here's one for you. All right, thank you very much, everybody.